All right, so thank you everyone for joining us for number 12 of the Hops Lockdown series. Tonight we're excited to sit down with Bishop Hendricken pitching coach and director of pitching development for the Ocean State Wave, Chris Sheehan. Chris, thanks for being with us tonight.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me. I've been following along with your series, and you've definitely had some great guests. So I'm definitely honored to be a part of what you got going on.
Yeah, no, we're looking forward to it. I think we'll hit on some great topics with pitching, and also from the high school side. This will be kind of the first high school guest we've had on, which I think it's a good topic that kind of needs to be talked about. And you guys are doing a lot of great things at Hendricken, setting the model for what should be done in high school baseball. So first, why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself first as a player, and then how you got into coaching and kind of your time at Hendricken now?
Sure. Yeah. So as a player, I mean, growing up, I always had some pretty good talent. I kind of played all over the place, and then once I got to high school, I really started to focus on pitching. And I had a pretty good high school career, and got the opportunity to go play at URI. And then during my freshman year at URI, I started to experience some shoulder pain, and I kind of just wrote it off, didn't think too much of it, gave it a little bit of rest, and I ended up redshirting that year. And when I went to play summer ball, I was down in North Carolina, and after my first appearance, like I could not move my arm the next day. So I knew something was really wrong, and I was living by myself there. I went to a local hospital and got an MRI, and they told me that I had a partial tear of the supraspinatus, one of the rotator cuff muscles, and that they recommended rehabbing and not getting surgery. So ultimately, I came home, I rehabbed until that fall, and I remember very vividly pitching in a fall game at URI, and I had nothing. I kind of had to gut it out. My arm was killing me. And the next day, that same feeling where I just could not move my arm at all. So, long story short, I ended up going back to the doctor. I ended up needing surgery. I got the surgery done. And, I tried to make a comeback, but I think I probably rushed the rehab a little bit. It's probably like a 12-month rehab that I tried to do in 10 months so that I could be back for fall ball the following year. And just wasn't the same. I really didn't have the velocity, and velocity was always something that I kind of needed to develop to take that next step. I mean, I had a good fastball, but I needed more. And what was frustrating for me was that I was never really able to build velocity because I couldn't throw without pain. So what that inspired me to do was really to try to learn as much as I could about not just the shoulder, but overall how the body works. And I just always had an interest in baseball in general, but specifically pitching. So that kind of got me into it, and I was fortunate that Coach Holloway at Hendricken gave me an opportunity to get into coaching basically right away. I started coaching Legion, and then as soon as I graduated college, I started coaching at Hendricken. So I'm definitely thankful for him giving me that opportunity. And I mean, kind of my mindset all along has just been to try to prevent kids from going through the same thing that I went through. I wish I knew now what I knew then, or wish I knew then what I know now.
What year was that, Chris?
That I had the surgery.
Yeah.
So I had my surgery in 2011. It was in November, right before Thanksgiving. And like I said, I tried to get back for fall ball the following year for September, and I just didn't have it. So I even experimented with dropping down to the side, and at that point now, I think I was compensating a little bit. I started to experience pain in other parts of my body, my elbow, my lower back. But in hindsight, I'm thankful for the experience. Like they say, everything happens for a reason. And I think from a coaching perspective, all those experiences really helped me to understand a lot.
So think about how different in less than a decade that baseball and softball strength and conditioning and rehab has come compared to what you went through. Because obviously after the surgery, you went into rehab. So looking at things now, it's light years different.
Absolutely. I think back to my experiences with physical therapy, and not that they were doing anything wrong. It's just kind of what people knew at that point about rehabbing a throwing shoulder. And, I think things would be markedly different if I were to go through that process now. just because of the amount of information that's out there. I mean, just like we were just talking before we came on, the amount of resources that are out there for free, during this current pandemic and really anytime, it's a great opportunity for not just professionals in the industry to learn and develop, but also, I mean, I know if I was an athlete now, I would be taking full advantage of all these resources to try to learn for myself and understand the why behind things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the common theme I think we've heard too with all the guests we've had on is they've all had experiences in their playing career that kind of shaped them into the coach they are. And like you alluded to, it's the fact that it's driven you to learn and grow as a coach to help better develop um, your players. So I think that kind of we can get into the first topic, I guess, on the baseball side, is at the high school level. I think this is something that I know Matt and I talked about the other night. Is this gets lost in terms of pitching development, um, and I want you to talk a little bit about what you guys do at Hendricken in terms of pitching development. Um, at the, I guess you can say at the micro high school level for people that would view it, and how you get your guys kind of ready and on a consistent schedule during the high school season.
Sure. Yeah, I would say to start off, the most difficult aspect of being a high school pitching coach is that you're just so limited with time. You start like the third Monday of March or second Monday of March with pitchers and catchers, and then you're done in early June or middle of June. And all during that time, kids have to go out and compete. So it makes it very difficult to make any, overhauling changes or anything like that, or to implement certain programs or drills or exercises that require a significant amount of teaching because you're just so strapped for time. So you really have to make the most of the time that you have. The Interscholastic League did change the rules this past year where you, for the first time, at least in my coaching career, you were able to work with players in the off season. So we were able to work with 3 players at a time, as I'm sure you know. And that definitely helped me to kind of implement some things and teach some kids some things to lead into the season. Now, obviously, as of today, our season is canceled, but I still think that there was some benefit in it. So from the perspective of developing pitchers, at the high school level, I really try to focus the first 2 weeks, like once our team is picked and even during pitchers and catchers, of just exposing them to a lot of different things. So, it might be plyo carry drills, it might be core velocity belt, it might be, you name your drill or device or whatever. And then I like to, after those 2 weeks, I like to give them freedom because I think when you give them freedom, it creates a lot more buy-in from the player, and their level of focus when performing the drills is going to be a lot higher if they know that they're the one that chose it. So I like to describe it as I give them structure, like within a box, and then within that box they have freedom. So I actually give guys homework where I have them develop their own routine based on everything that we've done. Like, some guys like throwing a football before they pick up a baseball. That's fine. I give them that structure of what I think can be beneficial to them. I obviously provide them with some guidance as to what I feel would be best from like an individual standpoint for them. But ultimately, I give them the freedom to pick and choose what they like to do. Because like I said, some guys, like, they like doing plyo care drills. But to be honest with you, it's very difficult for me to implement those. I think they're great. I think there's a ton of benefit. But if, to go through that whole driveline series that they use of 5 drills, it's pretty difficult to implement that and teach that in the high school season because, it's really important that if they're going to do them, they do them correctly. And I think you guys would attest to so frequently people just see weighted balls or plyo care balls as the new thing, and they just jump at it and want to do it without necessarily doing it correctly. And really what they're doing is probably causing more harm than good. So if I could just, build on that a little bit, just to give you a glimpse into what our practices look like, because I think practices is obviously where we're going to get the most from the pitchers. On game day, like they're getting their throwing in before the game, and they have a drill series they may go through. But once the game starts, like, as a high school, I'm coaching third base too, so my focus isn't all on the pitchers at that point. So in practice, I have to say, like, our head coach, Coach Holloway, has been outstanding in kind of giving me freedom with the pitchers, and he's bought into what I've been doing for the last 7 years. So like when we start a practice, our whole team will go through a dynamic warm up, which I try to emphasize the importance of that as much as possible too, because I think that's an opportunity for kids. Yeah, they're going to elevate their body temperature and prepare their tissues for activity, but also they're creating movement patterns, either good or bad. So it's really important that they're focusing on what they're doing. Like I always use the example of a lateral lunge. If you're doing a poor lateral lunge, that's going to transfer negatively to your delivery or to your swing. You're not going to be able to load your back hip quite as well. So we start with a dynamic warm up, and then the position players will go and do their throwing. The pitchers will come and see me, and they'll go through like a soft tissue routine, nothing crazy, foam roller, lax ball, using the stick on their forearm. And then they'll do their band work. And then I typically set up like a pre-throwing routine. So that might include some med ball work. It's all really centered around patterning and preparing the body to throw. So it might be med ball work. It could be plyo-care drills for certain guys. It could be core velocity belt drills. It could be just some activation stuff. But then the pitchers will eventually transfer into their throwing. So while they're doing all this, the position players complete their throwing program and then transition into individual defense. So like it probably takes 45 minutes before the pitchers are ready to go and join the rest of the team with practice, with whatever it may be, team defense or whatever.
And that's refreshing to hear, only from the standpoint that sometimes we hear stories from high school kids where they get 5 to 10 minutes to warm up to throw. And one of our themes has been, I know it's skipping a little bit ahead, but it's catch play, right? And giving players the time to actually play catch and work on their arm without feeling rushed and going off and working on first and third and bunt drill defense, right? It's giving the guys a chance to do what they need to do to be ready to play or practice.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's so important. Like I said, Coach Holloway's been great in understanding that and kind of accommodating that with his practices and his plan for practice. But John, I was telling you, I listened to your interview, and I say this all the time, and you said it in yours. Throwing is pitcher's BP every day. Hitters take BP all the time. Every day when a pitcher throws, that's their BP. So they need to not be rushed. I really emphasize focus. To be honest, I try to get the guys not to talk during their throwing, with the exception of providing feedback to their partner. I probably could hold them a little bit more accountable on that, but for the most part, they do a good job.
Yep. I think because, at the end of the day too, you get coaches where they're, the expectation is your pitchers, you want them to go out and compete and be successful for you. That's their job. That's why they're on your team. And I know it blows my mind every time I hear someone that comes back and it's like, oh, I get 5 minutes to play catch. And it's, like you said, it is their batting practice. It's their opportunity to get better. And every throw counts for something. It counts towards your day's training economy, like the amount you can do each day. In that, say, 25-minute span, average of a max long toss day, whatever your day is, it's like you need to maximize every throw that you have. And I think it's so important. Getting back to how condensed the high school season is, you have some guys that come in, and this is the first year with the rule where you can see guys. You have some guys that come in that have trained in the offseason, some guys that haven't. So it's like every day that they have is very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it was Eric Cressy said a couple of years ago, every throw is an opportunity to get better or to get worse.
Yep.
So that focus level really needs to be there, and that level of commitment to your catch play is just so important.
How do you manage, Chris? I don't really think of too many guys recently for you who have played the field and pitched. But if you ran into that sort of situation, how would you manage that player?
Yeah, it's funny. I always say this to people. I feel like it's kind of like a misconception that like when you come to Hendricken, if you're a pitcher, you're going to be a pitcher only. And, that's not necessarily the case. We've had, several guys that have played both ways. In many cases, it's the pitcher's decision that they just want to focus on pitching.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I was kind of like that. My junior year, I used to be in the lineup sometimes. I would get at bats, and senior year, I kind of knew I was going to college to pitch, so I just wanted to focus on pitching. But like last year, we had Matt Smaldone, who was a first team All State pitcher as a junior, but was also our starting first baseman. So he ended up battling some arm issues coming into last season, so he didn't really pitch a whole lot yet. He still trained as a pitcher. So to answer your question, this is a concept I kind of just came up with a couple of years ago and I've stuck to. I always prioritize skill development over any sort of like conditioning. So like if a pitcher is, getting his pitching work in and the rest of the pitchers are going to go through their conditioning for the day, I'll send that two-way guy to go take BP or take ground balls or whatever it may be. Or, in a situation as I was explaining earlier, like while the pitchers are going through their pre-throwing stuff and their throwing progression, the rest of the team is doing individual defense. So if I have a guy that's an infielder or an outfielder or, whatever, and they just threw the day before, I don't really need them to work on anything with pitching. I don't need them to throw a lot, if at all. So I'd rather him go and take his ground balls, and then he can do his recovery stuff, later on in practice. So I think I've found a good balance. It's definitely difficult because you want to get guys plenty of swings, and you want to make sure they're also focusing on the intricacies of becoming a pitcher. But I also think it's kind of an individual thing. Like we had a kid this year that was, most likely going to be like a back end of the bullpen guy for us, but also, a middle of the order bat for us and an everyday player. So he was probably going to focus more as a hitter and then just throw, a bullpen or two a week and try to get him some innings in the preseason to get him acclimated to the mound, and then also incorporate some arm care with him.
Sure. It was interesting that Coach Mezzanotte, who recently passed away from Pilgrim and PC, always would tell me that you'll never win a state championship if your shortstop is one of your starting pitchers. And it always stuck with me because that's where a little bit more of an understanding now that we have with our strength and conditioning and physical therapy, the amount of just arm usage that player ends up happening. It holds true. And that's something from a guy who played baseball years ago and coached several years ago, and he understood it back then. And now we kind of know why he said that.
Right. Yeah, it's something you're seeing in really every sport now, workload management.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just understanding that workload and the stress that's being put on their arm. It's very, very difficult for a kid to pitch and play shortstop, which is, a high stress position. It's a lot easier to put them in the outfield or put them at first base or wherever. Now, don't get me wrong. We've had guys that do it. In many cases, especially at youth baseball, like your shortstop is probably going to be your best pitcher too. It just at that point is educating the player, his parents, and hopefully the coach is educated as well about, just taking care of it and managing that workload.
Sure. I actually wanted to ask you both about this because I know that you guys are both awaiting your practicals, right, for the Driveline program.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could both, or Chris, why don't you go first? Because John mentioned it a little bit the other day, but what has that meant to you and what have you learned from taking that course?
Yeah. So I initially did, and I think John, you did as well. I did the pitch design one.
Mhm.
And I found that to be really beneficial because obviously, like, pitch design is something that's become very, very popular in a place like Driveline. And even your facility has a lot of the technology with Rapsodo and in some cases TrackMan. But they also delved into how you can focus on pitch design without all of the, say, fancy technology. But in regards to the foundations of pitching course, I found that to be really, really beneficial. I think Driveline did a great job putting that together and, really built on different things as they went along and did it in a way that was really easy to understand. Like I found some of the research that they presented on mechanics to be really, really interesting and eye-opening. And I would definitely recommend it to any coach. And from a couple people that I've talked to, they say that the live portion is even more beneficial. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, I would have to agree, and that was one thing that I know I wanted to get better at being in the private world is like the programming, and the understanding of the blending of each phase of programming, because I think a lot gets lost in, blending each phase and going from, okay, like we're picking up a plyo care ball for the first time and we're addressing what we assessed you on and starting to dive into that all the way up until that last bullpen or live session you throw before going to high school season. Um, so I think that was what I got out of it the most, was how to like blend each program together and how that's going to be beneficial for our guys this offseason, because I think we did a good job of it this offseason, but there were some phases that they talked about that I was like, okay, that makes sense to phase that into 2 weeks instead of trying to do actual bullpens and pitch design at the same stuff at the same time, doing pitch design for 2 weeks and then going into more competitive bullpens for another 2 weeks is probably more realistic. So I'd say just the understanding of how to program and blend each phase together, to make sure guys are still moving efficiently while we're trying to attack other things too. Um, I would say that's probably what I enjoyed most out of it, and I'm excited for the practical portion too, because I've heard the same thing, that it's even better than the course itself.
For sure. Yeah, I've been following Driveline for, many years now, and you know, doing that course, they actually presented some things that I had never seen from them before.
Yep.
So I think as a coach, it's really important to consistently stay updated with, especially organizations like that are so on the cutting edge and constantly researching things. I think that's really, really important to continue to learn and grow as a coach.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think everything's evolving so much, and there's so much new stuff that comes out week to week, month to month, and stuff that we were talking about maybe 2 years ago isn't as prevalent now as maybe it was just a couple of years ago. As there's constant change in what they're doing, and they have all the tools and the resources and the minds to put it together. So yeah, I would agree.
Chris, one of the things that I've been asking too, and this is kind of being on the coaching side of things and going through and learning all of this information, what do you think, thinking back to your playing days, was one of your biggest either faults as a pitcher or things that you could have worked on to either stay healthier or be a better performer?
Oh man, where do I start? Like I said earlier, I wish I knew then what I know now. I just look back at my overall habits as a high school athlete, and they weren't good. I mean, my nutrition wasn't very good. I thought I lifted weights, and then I remember getting to college and realizing that I had no idea what I was doing. So that was definitely an eye-opening experience. I wish I understood strength and conditioning back then, like I do now, and just arm care in general. Like I was one of those guys, and like I always try to say to kids, no one thinks warming up is important until you get hurt, and then once you get hurt, you say like, oh man, maybe I should have focused on that a little bit more. Like I was one of those guys that would show up to the field and I'd do some arm circles and maybe run a little bit and stretch my arm out and then just get to throwing. And obviously not as much of the stuff that exists now existed back then, even though it was only 11 years ago. But I just there's a lot of things. I even think back to my posture. Like my posture was not good. I had very rounded shoulders. I didn't understand anything about that. I didn't really understand the way the body moves either, or the importance of your movements in the weight room and whatnot. I thought, like many people do, the weight that you move is most important, not the form. So if I could go back, there's definitely a lot that I would change, but at the same time, no one, I don't think, really knew any better at that point.
Sure. I just like to think, like from a hitting example, I think of myself and just the drills that I was doing that were just so counterproductive to what what we know now, even from a hitting standpoint. So that's why it's always interesting to hear, because that's a great experience from a coaching standpoint, is being able to present what not to do, right?
Right.
And be like, this is where we want to stay away from, because we want to stay healthy and we want to increase performance. And I was talking to John about that the other day, with just how his foot landed and just hit the way his body type didn't allow him to really get into any sort of internal rotation on his land leg. Like, it's just impossible. And that's probably why he kind of capped out on velo. So that's something that he knows that he can look out for when. So that's why it's interesting to talk to people and say, if you could go back and teach yourself something that would, even from a mechanical standpoint, well, like, that's just interesting to me, because now you're self-evaluating, right?
Yeah. And just to build on that a little bit, like I said, college was an eye-opening experience when I first got there from a lifting perspective, but even just from a pitching perspective, like, I was fortunate to have Jim Foster, who is now the head coach at Army West Point, and, regarded by many as one of the top pitching coaches in the country. So, like, I remember my first day of college practice, just the amount that I learned about, like, structuring a routine was incredible. And that started to stoke that fire a little bit for me. Not that I didn't already have an interest in it. It's just now I was getting a lot of really good information. So I started to really eat that up.
Yeah. I think it was like too. I think what's evolved so much is you would hear the term so much of like just natural ability, like, oh, that guy has it, like he was just born with it. And I think now, like, we're able to figure out the guys who were maybe born with something, and like we can expand upon that now in terms of the resources that we have in terms of player development. Is we can take the guy who maybe has, like, shows a glimmer of it, and we can kind of make him have that it factor, because there's so many resources out there now that we can take guys and say, okay, this is what you need to work on, and this is what the ultimate goal is to get there. Before, I feel like it was, you either had it or you didn't,
Right.
type of thing. And people didn't really look at player development.
Absolutely. Just as you were talking there, I started thinking back to one of my former players who you guys know very well as well. And Mike Webb, I think, is a prime example of that. Mike, I think you might be listening, but Mike, I'm sure he would agree, wasn't necessarily blessed with like a ton of natural ability, and he was kind of a small kid when he first came to high school, but the amount of development that he has had over the years into what he is now is incredible. I mean, I give him a ton of credit because not only does he put in a lot of hard work, but he also, as we spoke about, understands what he's doing and why he's doing it. And obviously the results have paid off for him. You definitely can't get by on just natural ability. Very few people can.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree.
Chris, I want to go back to this really quick so I don't forget. Do you guys implement things at the freshman level, or is it only when guys get to varsity or JV when you start to teach them their stuff?
Yeah. So what was it? Last year, Corey Allard moved from our JV team to our freshman team as the freshman head coach, and he's a pretty progressive thinker as well from a pitching development standpoint. He's into a lot of the same stuff that I'm in, so he's done a pretty good job of implementing a lot of these things. And we've sat down and kind of structured a plan for what to do, and then we were able to get the JV staff on board as well. So that's definitely helped out over the last several years in trying to just and at the freshman level, it might be a little bit more basic, introduction stuff, and then they start to build on it and learn more and more. But yeah, I definitely, I'm thankful that Corey's at that level and is into some of the same stuff.
Well, that's huge, because that's almost getting into like having the continuity of a collegiate program to start to get guys ready. So that way, like you said, when they do get to you, that they have done plyo kid drills before, they have done J-band exercises, right? So from a continuity standpoint, then that's something that can be implemented as a freshman and not necessarily concerned with the results, right? When they get into, if you're teaching them something at that level, and then they can make mistakes, right? At that, and then
Right.
they get to you, now they're kind of put in a position where they have to perform and the pressure's on, but they've learned all that stuff all the way through.
Yeah. Yeah. Like last year we had 7 returning pitchers last year. So I loved it because they came into the season like I didn't really have to teach them a whole lot. You know, they already understood what we were doing, so we were able to get even deeper into it. And what's nice about what we were just talking about is now that's something that I really expect each year, because now these guys are coming up with at least a little bit of background as to what we're going to be doing. So that makes my job a little bit easier. And also I think aids in their development because I'm able to then get into some deeper stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's huge. Is just, the continuity of what they're hearing from, day to day or year to year. And I think it just aids in development because you can get so much information, which is great. You can hear so many different things, but some kids can get overwhelmed by it. But to be able to be in the program from freshman to senior year and be able to hear the same terms, and it's like, okay, I'm familiar with that because I heard that last year when I was a freshman. So I think it takes away some of that like stress and the unknowns of like, okay, I was on freshman last year, I have a chance to make varsity this year. What's the difference going to be?
Right.
And I think that's important that some schools it doesn't happen, because there's not that communication, and it kind of stresses some kids out because they don't know what they're going to hear. But I think it's so important. I'd like to kind of change gears a little bit. Um, and I know this is something that I found really helpful is, communication, and that's a basic term, but I think one of the things that sometimes we forget as coaches is, these kids are going through their everyday life of school. They're in school for 6 hours a day before they come to practice, or in my case, before they come to the facility. And I think sometimes, we forget that, and we like looking at that at a deeper level. Like, how are you as a high school coach kind of aiding in the communication process? And like, do you have that open door policy where it's like, okay, this guy has had a rough week, and how you coach him at practice might be different than what you normally would?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say I'm fortunate in the fact that I work at the school that I coach at. So that's definitely a big advantage because I'm able to see these guys every day. If they're acting up in class or something's going on with them, I'm usually alerted of it. I can check on their grades. But most of all, I'm able to have more time to build that relationship with them. And I think back to like last year's senior class and the relationships that I built with them over the course of their careers was just something that was really, really special to me, but also I think was really important in, like you said, if we're at practice, I think they felt comfortable with me to be able to share some certain things that maybe they normally wouldn't share with another coach. Maybe a coach that they didn't trust, they wouldn't tell that their arm's a little bit sore that day in fear of, getting pushed aside. And I think I had developed that trust with them. And that's something that I aim to do with all my players in general, because I just think that's really, really important. And ultimately, that'll get them to play harder for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Is the more trust they have in us as coaches, the more we get, the more buy-in we get, the more we get out of them, the more trust they have in the information that we give them when we present them with something. Um, so I think that's a topic that was important to bring up because it goes untalked about because like we never know what kids are going through, and if we can get more insight into what their life is like, it gives us an advantage in coaching them and making them the best player possible.
Absolutely. And when, the more time you spend with them, the more you start to understand them as an individual and kind of what makes them tick and what buttons to push. I've definitely had some guys that I've had to be harder on and push them. And I've had other guys who I know I really don't need to push because their desire to get better was there. It was innate. I didn't really have to push them a whole lot. So it's understanding the differences in the individual. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Chris, we have actually just so I don't forget I don't want to miss it. I actually got a question on Facebook because amazingly Facebook Live decided to work again. Would you recommend a youth 11-year-old start to pitch from the stretch only?
I mean, I would say the stretch is definitely more of a simplistic delivery. And to be honest, I'm kind of going not to get off topic, but I've gone away from what I used to do. Like I think everybody in the baseball world has always structured bullpens where you start from the windup and then progress to the stretch because that's typically what would happen in a game. But I've actually changed that mindset where I have guys start from the stretch because I view it as a more simplistic delivery and let them then progress to the windup. But in regards to the question, I would say I think it's good to do both, because I think at a young age it's really important to practice multiple different movements. And I think that will just help them gain more of an understanding of their body and an ability to control their body by pitching from both the windup and the stretch. And ultimately, I mean, they're probably going to want to pitch from the stretch once they get to the big field anyway. I mean, pitch from the windup once they get to the big field anyways. So it's probably better to start working on that as a younger player. That would be my advice, John. I don't know if you have a different opinion there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's important to teach athleticism, especially at that young age. It's, trial and error. I think it's all trial and error. It's just figuring out what works and then becoming comfortable. I've found like when I get guys in high school that I start to eliminate the windup altogether, because I want them to look at their movement on a very basic level. And sometimes you get these guys with all these crazy windups, and it's like, well, we're taking away from the basics of how we need to move in order to be an efficient mover. So I find myself as they get older starting to maybe take that away a little bit. But I think at a younger level, it's good to try it out and figure it out, what you like, and just be athletic. That's probably my thing for someone at 11.
Yeah, I think ultimately it might just help them find a little bit of a different movement pattern and a little bit more freedom in their delivery.
Yeah. Yeah.
I smiled while you guys were talking, because I got a question from someone that says, what are your thoughts on playing different sports that collide with training, especially as a pitcher and throwing during the off season?
I'm a huge proponent of playing multiple sports. I just think that the benefits of playing multiple sports are they just go on and on, in regards to, one, you're avoiding any sort of burnout, both mentally and physically. So frequently now, not just with baseball, we see so many sports that kids are participating year round, and at a younger age especially, I just don't think that that's good. And two, I think that perhaps the biggest benefit is the development of athleticism. I think back to guys like Mike King. Mike King was a great pitcher at Hendricken, now pitching with the Yankees. But, he played basketball up until his senior year of high school. And I'm sure if you asked him, he would definitely credit that with improving his athleticism. So I think you have to find a balance. If you're serious about baseball and you're serious about your development and preparing for your season, yeah, play basketball, but also make sure you're disciplined enough to find some time to get your throwing in. And if you can squeak in, 1-2 lifting sessions a week, where you focus on the major movements on top of playing basketball and getting your throwing in, then I think you're far ahead of where everybody else will be at.
This is being recorded, so this person's going to definitely play this back to you in a couple of years, I think.
Yeah, I see who asked it. Hey, I encourage it, Braxton. Play basketball. It'll help you in the long run, but make sure you're getting your throwing in too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
He's asking that question because we talked about this today. So
okay. And just to build on that, like, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of kids who only play one sport who are still very successful. But I think when you are only playing that one sport, especially if it's baseball, and especially if you're a pitcher only, which, like I said, some guys are, some guys aren't. And like, it becomes that much more important to focus on developing athleticism in your training. So it might be incorporating, from a programming perspective, incorporating more change of direction stuff, or more, plyometrics, or whatever it may be. But it's really important to emphasize that athletic development.
Sure. There's another, speaking of Mike Webb from earlier, I'll just read it off. So he always hears the idea that players shouldn't work on throwing a curveball until they get to middle school / high school. In my opinion, that's too late. Would you agree that by teaching the proper mechanics at a younger age, there would be more benefit?
I could not agree more with Mike there. I've been saying this for years. Like, at the high school level, when a kid comes to high school that was told growing up that you can't throw a curveball until you're, 14, whatever year, it's noticeable. All right. You can see the kid that doesn't have the ability to spin the ball when they get to high school, and you can tell right away who wasn't allowed to throw a curveball at a young age. Now, with that being said, I wouldn't say that kids should be snapping off, 40, 50 curveballs a game at the little league level. But I think that just from like a motor development standpoint, I think it's really important for kids to learn to spin the ball at a young age and learn proper technique. And I saw a presentation a couple of years ago that talked about, from a biomechanics perspective, a curveball is actually the safest pitch, least stressful on the arm when thrown correctly. I think where the curveball kind of gets a bad rap is many people throw it incorrectly. And also, if you think about it, and now pitch count rules may limit this a little bit, but if you throw a really good curveball at the youth level, you're probably really good. So you're probably going to get used an awful lot. Your little league coach is going to want to use you. Your travel ball coach is going to want to use you. So chances are you're dealing with some overuse injuries or overuse issues in some way. So I would say definitely kids should start spinning a breaking ball at a younger age, maybe 10, 11, 12, just to feel it. But it's really important that they don't overuse it and that they're doing it correctly. John, I don't know if you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the things that I do with the younger guys is like we work on it in catch play and stuff, and it's like you earn your curveballs for the day. Like, and that's like it gives them like kind of that reward system where it's like, okay, if you execute a quality bullpen, then at the end we'll start mixing in fastballs and curveballs. So that way it's like I set the tone. Like, I'm not just going to allow you to come out here and bang off, like you said, 20 curveballs in a row. But it gives them that opportunity to work on it and catch play, and then focus on, how they're moving and like commanding their fastball, developing a changeup, and then we work on it at the end. And I think that's good. Like, as a coach, it's like set the guidelines of like how many you're going to allow your guy to throw every day. Because like you said, they're probably going to be the best kid on the team if they are. So they could probably get away with throwing a fastball and a changeup. But I think it's a coach, it's good to set those guidelines of, okay, these are how many I'm going to let you throw, and we're going to progress into you like blending in more and more as you get older or further into the season. But I think it's good to kind of set a guideline of like how many they're allowed to throw.
For sure.
Well, I think that I'm a little bit older than you guys, and so I think that the whole curveball like hysteria started back in like the mid 90s, and then even into the early 2000s, where there were literally no pitch count rules at the time, so kids were being used way too much, and I think that it was the overall stress on the arm back then, which then and then people were like, well, it must be the curveball based on looking at the motion of the arm when throwing it. But with newer data and slow motion cameras, we can now see that there's not, and doing the studies, I'm pretty sure Chris, that Driveline was the one that did that showed that there was less stress on the elbow throwing a curveball than a fastball and even a changeup. Because that's the other thing you hear is everybody's like, teach them a changeup instead. Well, it's really not. It's less stressful than a curveball. So hopefully, as people and coaches get more educated on and hear this stuff, then as long as they are being taught the right way, that's the huge caveat in this too, right? Is that they have to be taught the right way to throw it, and then they are monitoring all of their throws and their pitch count. Then we'll hopefully can get this to go away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree.
I see another question on Facebook. I don't think you guys obviously can see this on Facebook. I'm getting some good questions today. What are your thoughts on fall ball for 7th and 8th graders?
Fall ball, I think it depends on the individual. Are they a guy that like needs to work on their baseball skill? Then, perhaps. Are they a guy that's a pitcher that didn't really get a lot of innings in their middle school season or their travel ball season? Then yeah, fall ball may be a good option. But most 7th and 8th graders, what they need is they need to play baseball for the spring and the summer, and then they need to get on a good strength and conditioning program. Like I mentioned earlier, perhaps play another sport, put the ball down for a little bit, and just let their bodies recover. And I think at that age, there's such a window for development from a strength perspective, and they could set themselves up in such a better position when they get to high school if they've already established a good program, if they've already been on a good program and just really developed good movement quality and built some strength on top of those quality movements.
Yeah,
I think fall ball has a place. I don't think it's a necessity for everybody, And I would say the majority of kids probably don't need to play fall ball.
And I think one of the things that drives me nuts is when it's like the fall ball is going further and further now, unfortunately, right? So we're getting guys into the facility almost near Thanksgiving to get them started for their strength and conditioning, or because their fall ball season has lasted forever. Like if there's going to be a fall ball season, a controlled season from like September to mid-October for like 6 weeks, then that's fine. Then put the ball and bat down and move on to, because I think another issue that we're having, this is probably a discussion for a whole nother day, is the issue with practice and actually playing too many games, right? In the spring and the summer with the travel ball circuits, it's like advertising playing over 100 games in the season. Well, maybe that's not necessarily the best thing for baseball players in terms of learning the game of baseball.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me going on travel ball. And I think there are some very good travel ball organizations. I just think that it has become watered down, and too many of them focus on exactly what you just said, playing a ton of games, when that might not necessarily be the best approach. I think, especially at younger age groups, the primary focus should be on development. Now, certainly you have to have a schedule, you have to play games, or else no one would play for your team. And kids, they have a competitive nature. You want them to get out and compete and be able to, put all their hard work to use on the field. But I think, from a development perspective, practice is so important. And this goes back to a big belief of mine, and I kind of mentioned it earlier. You have to educate kids on why. Like, I put such an emphasis on educating kids why they're doing something, and also making them establish their own routine. Because I know once the high school season's over, they're going to play for, whatever travel team, and, potentially in the fall as well. They need to kind of run their own show. They need to kind of understand what their routine is, because they might not be getting that guidance. Again, depending on what team. Like I said, there are teams that do a very good job.
Yep. All right, we got another question. What is your opinion on long distance running or running poles versus more sprinting work when it comes to handling pitchers?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty hot topic in the baseball world, and has been for the last several years with, a lot of the research that's out there. But to be honest, like it's not even really research. It's just understanding energy systems and the way the body works. Like, I am definitely a bigger proponent of sprinting than long distance running. And as a player, I used to long distance run, and I loved it. I did feel like it benefited me in building my endurance. But I think you can do the same thing through other modalities that might be more beneficial. So I'm definitely a fan of sprinting over long distance running for pitchers, as it trains the energy system that you're using when you're pitching, as you know, so that anaerobic energy system. And you can do some longer distance sprinting where you're making guys go really hard. I personally like build-ups a lot. So I usually will do like 60 or 80-yard build-ups with the guys, where, by the 30 or 40-yard line, they're reaching top speed. So they're running a decent distance, but at a high level of intensity, which is exactly what they're going to be doing when they pitch. Plus the rest to work ratio of sprinting mimics that of pitching a whole lot more. You might run a sprint that takes you 3 seconds, and then you're resting 20 seconds. Well, that sounds pretty much like what you're doing when you pitch.
Right. And then in terms of getting the best benefit for what I think that coaches and trainers maybe in the past have wanted, maybe more coaches than anything, that wanting their pitchers to do a long distance run, you can do something that is much more applicable to pitching, and just get their heart rate up and keep it up there, right? So that way you're not losing either range of motion, or you're not just wasting time. You're actually giving them exercises, keeping the heart rate up to build up their aerobic capacity that way, as opposed to doing just endless amount of pulls.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I mean, the whole thing, and the reason I like long distance running is, it makes you sweat. It elevates your heart rate. You get blood pumping, and new blood pumping throughout the body is definitely good for healing and recovery. But like you just said, there's plenty of ways in which you can accomplish the same exact thing that are more beneficial. Whether it's like I typically, for a recovery routine, the day after my guys pitch, I usually have a circuit of like 6 or 7 exercises. So it might be like, a 20-yard shuffle to a 40-yard sprint, then some sort of mobility exercise, then some sort of arm care exercise, and then you go back into another movement type thing, whether it's a build-up sprint or, back pedal or something like that. And you just structure it 6 to 7 exercises, and you have them go through 2 or 3 times, and you accomplish ironing out some of the asymmetries that they may have created the day before from consistently rotating one way. You start to address their arm care, and you're promoting recovery and healing at the same time. So I definitely think that's a better approach.
John, you enjoyed running poles, right?
Oh yeah. No, I wanted to just jump in on that quick.
Sure.
I think something too that I found with sprints is like you said, Chris, when we're looking at pitching, it's quick, explosive movements. We want to put as much force into the ground as possible. And then, it's when we're pitching and produce as much force late as possible. So it's like when we're training in sprint work, I like to put guys in a position. It's like simulate like you're loading into your back hip, and then sprint because it trains putting that force into the ground and then, being as explosive as possible for, like 60 feet or 90 feet. And I think that's something that I found. I mean, we don't do it much in the facility because we don't have space, but in the team setting, I think I agree, sprint work is so much better, and you still get all the benefits that you would out of running. I think long distance, it's kind of like, guys can get into bad habits. You start to see them, like, I know personally, like you get shin splints and then it affects your performance on the mound. And it's like, there's a lot of things that you can do to avoid any potential injuries by eliminating that long distance running, but sprint work allows to still hit home some of those key things.
Yeah. And I mean, like from like a muscle fiber development, I mean, do you want a pitcher that looks like a marathon runner, or do you want a pitcher that looks like Usain Bolt?
Yep.
I know who I would pick. And pitching is a fast twitch movement. You want to develop that. And like we've spoken about, you want to develop athleticism. I think one of the great things that's happening in baseball right now is a lot of the great pitchers are great athletes. So they're displaying that athleticism. Like Zach Greinke's been one of my favorite pitchers for a long time, and a lot of people don't know Zach Greinke was like a phenomenal shortstop in high school, and he exhibits that sometimes with the way that he fields his position on the mound. But he's a great athlete. Marcus Stroman, phenomenal athlete, was a two-way player at Duke. And he displays that in the way that he's able to control his body in his delivery, and mess with hitters' timing. So I just really like the way that the game is going, that a lot of the pitchers are really good athletes. So not to say all of them are, but.
Anybody else have any other questions? Just so we don't skip over anything. I think I grabbed everything on Facebook, but there's a little bit of a delay. So
we got a couple on this chat.
This one just came in.
Yeah, the Q&A.
Are aquatic workouts beneficial for pitchers and baseball players?
Yeah, so when I was at URI, actually, we used to do pool workouts every Wednesday night. And like this was in the off season, and it served as a really good way for us to recover. We would typically lift Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Wednesdays we would do a pool workout, and Saturdays we would do yoga. And I just found that the pool was a really, really good way to recover. I definitely wouldn't encourage swimming as like a method of training for pitchers, as it's just repeating a lot of the same stress that's put on your body with, if you're doing a forward stroke, it's just repeating a lot of the same stress specifically on the shoulder. And I think it can lead to, that overdevelopment of the front side and lack of development of the back side of your shoulder. Plus it can put you into some pretty extreme ranges of motion. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend swimming, but I would definitely recommend getting in the pool and doing some different things, whether it's simply going through a dynamic warm up in like the low end of a pool, or water that's up to your shoulders.
Treading water too.
What's that?
Treading water.
Yeah, treading water is awesome. You can build up some stamina that way. We used to do that. Yeah, I definitely would recommend that stuff. I'd probably stay away from swimming. I mean, as like a major method of training.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let me see. So I don't see anything else on Facebook. Nothing else in the.
Got one.
Wait.
What's this?
So this was a question that somebody actually asked. I think it was Mason Fioli about icing. Chris, you want to jump in first on icing?
Sure. Again, like going back, I was a guy that iced my arm. That's what basically everybody did at the time. That's what everybody thought was good. If you look at the newer research that's coming out and some of the information that's out there, I would say that icing is probably not the best way to promote healing and recovery of your arm. I think there's a lot better ways. And in some cases, you may even be counterproductive by icing. What I would recommend for post throwing recovery, I think Driveline's recovery routine is good. If you're not familiar with that, it just consists of some band pull aparts, some rebounder catches for force absorption and force acceptance. But one thing that I found that I've really liked is the Mark Pro. I'm sure you guys have probably used that, but the Mark Pro is definitely it's a like a stimulation unit if you're not familiar with it. But I think that's a way of creating muscle contraction without creating fatigue. So it's promoting blood flow and promoting new blood flow to the tissues to promote healing. So I think that's really good. I think soft tissue work is really, really good. Like I encourage my guys the day after they pitch, like wherever they're sore, spend plenty of time on that area, in regards to soft tissue work, because I think just getting new blood flow to that region is really, really important.
Yeah, I would have to agree on that too.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of time, maybe not necessarily in Mike's case, but people in general, one of the things that I ask people when they come in is, are you sore, or where do you complain about? I asked the parent, I said, where does he or she complain about discomfort or soreness anywhere? And a lot of times if they come in and they say, yeah, I'm icing every time after I pick up a baseball or a softball, it's like, well, that's probably means that there's something going on that we don't want to have going on, right? That's usually a sign that hopefully we've caught it now where it doesn't lead to injury, because you really shouldn't be too sore after playing baseball and softball,
Right.
Especially if you're doing your stuff or you're doing something like the Mark Pro. So if you're taking ibuprofen or anti-inflammatories and icing every time you pick up a ball, then there's probably something going on that you should see either a doctor or a PT or something like that.
Right. And what they're probably doing by doing that, by popping out, and again, I'll go back to myself. I did it. I used to take ibuprofen before every start. And that's definitely not something I would recommend, because what you're ultimately doing is you're just masking an underlying issue. There's something going on that, like you said, you probably should get checked out. And I think this also just brings up the point of communication, as John mentioned earlier. It's really important for a coach to build that trust with a player so that they feel comfortable communicating where they're sore or where they may have pain to you, because as a coach, that gives you a ton of feedback on, what might be happening in their delivery. Like if you got a guy that has a lot of anterior shoulder pain, well, what is the reason for that? And you can start to look at his delivery and figure out why. So I think that communication is really, really important as well.
Yep, definitely.
Bring the questions on. No one's got more questions?
Well, just a reminder that this will also be on, luckily we were able to get it on Facebook Live, so it will be on Facebook Live if you want to go back and watch it, but also on the Hops YouTube channel. We have all of them, all the previous ones, and then this one will be added on tomorrow, so you can go back and watch at any point.
Awesome.
Oh, somebody snuck in another question.
Uh-oh.
Couple more. Oh, no, just two. Same question, I guess. Asking about creatine and taking creatine, even at the high school level.
Yeah, I mean, by no means am I like a nutritional supplement expert, but in my, I also teach health at Hendricken, and this is a question I get all the time. I think that the common misconception around creatine is that it's bad for you, when in reality, if you look at the research, it's the most researched supplement in the history of supplements. And really the only negative effect that's ever been found is, um, weight gain. And most people who are taking it are trying to gain weight anyways. So I think creatine is useful for specific people. I don't think creatine is going to benefit a cross country runner a whole lot. If you're not familiar with creatine, essentially what it does is it increases your cell, the water within your cells and the muscles, allowing your muscles to function at a higher capacity. So it's going to benefit you from like a fast twitch perspective and a strength perspective, anything that requires a short burst of energy. But I think where people run into problems with creatine is they buy these really like fancy formulas that, it might be a pre-workout that has creatine in it. I definitely would not recommend that. I think another thing is like people start taking too much. If you've ever taken creatine, you see the scoop, and it's a pretty small scoop. It's small in comparison to a scoop for, say, a protein powder. So people see that and they think like, oh, this isn't enough. Let me take 2 or 3. And that's not really how it works. We produce creatine. We have creatine in our body, but you can supplement in small doses. But when you start taking too much of it for a period of time, it can almost trick your body into thinking that you don't have to produce it naturally. So I definitely wouldn't recommend taking more than 5 grams a day. I know many brands recommend loading, which would be like taking like 15, 20, 25 grams for the first week and then dropping to 5 grams. But there's been multiple studies that show that after a month, a group that loaded and a group that didn't essentially had the same results. So I think you're just wasting product that first week of loading.
Sure. And so to piggyback off your conversation, off your discussion point, I definitely agree that it's something that our players should be having, but that's also in conjunction with having a good diet too, right? I think that's the thing that people always overlook. And I know that Mike didn't ask for that reason because he eats very, very well to begin with. But a lot of times people want to jump to protein and creatine discussions when they're eating under 2,000 calories a day and they have, I don't know, cinnamon toast crunch for breakfast, right? Or something like that.
No, I couldn't agree more. I preach this to my classes all the time. A supplement is exactly what the word supplement means. It's to fill in the gap. All right. It's to fill in the gap to an already good diet. It's not to replace. It's to simply fill in the holes of what you might need more of in your diet. But until your diet is sound and you're, eating a good breakfast and you're eating, at least 3 meals a day and you're eating vegetables and all that, always remember the nutrients that you get from real food are going to be better for you than the nutrients you get from a supplement. So I'm definitely like, I would say I'm a supplement minimalist. I don't recommend supplements a lot. I definitely think some have use, but I think kids and people in general need to focus on their diet first.
Speaking of diets, sunflower seeds or gum?
Who asked that?
Rock Arnold has been asking some of our guests.
I got to go with gum.
Really?
Yeah, definitely a gum guy.
What about if you have to have sunflower seeds, which flavor?
I actually like mixing the barbecue and the ranch.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then Will asked about yoga for recovery.
Yeah, I think Will's probably asking that because I have the pitchers do that sometimes at Hendricken. I'll take them in my classroom, we'll move all the desks out of the way, and then I'll put up like a guided yoga video. But yoga is awesome. I think there's a ton of benefits to yoga, whether it's, learning how to control your breathing. It's definitely like a calming thing for the mind and for the body. Obviously, there's some mobility and flexibility benefits that can be had, but it's important to remember that mobility and flexibility isn't necessarily something that everybody needs to be working on. If you're a hypermobile person, you probably don't need to be doing yoga and going into all these extreme ranges of motion. So before I do yoga with the guys at Hendricken, I always screen the video first. And if there's any positions that I don't want them to go into, say anterior humeral glide where your shoulder's popping forward a lot, I just either have them skip over that or find a different video. But I definitely think it has some recovery benefits. I think it's something that you probably don't want to do the day before you pitch. I've actually made that mistake in the past because it can elicit some soreness and some fatigue, especially with some of the positions that it puts you in from a core strengthening standpoint. But I think it has a lot of benefit. I just wouldn't do it the day before pitching.
Sure. John, you want to grab that question in the chat? Because I have another one coming up on Facebook Live.
Thoughts related to hydration, amino acid mixture versus Gatorade, water, or Pedialyte during a game.
Geez, did I turn into a nutritionist all of a sudden? I also a topic that I cover in health class. I think Gatorade is way overconsumed. I mean, if you look at the amount of sugar in Gatorade, it's ridiculous. I think the average recommendation for an adult male in the United States is 37.5 grams of sugar for a day. A bottle of Gatorade has 34 grams in it. So with one bottle of Gatorade, you're almost getting to that limit that you don't want to exceed. And then also, I think like most people in general don't need Gatorade. They're not sweating enough. They're not working hard enough to need Gatorade. I think if you eat properly and you consume enough water, I think you should be plenty hydrated. Obviously there might be some certain situations where it's extremely humid out and you might be out there for a long period of time playing a doubleheader or whatever, where Gatorade or Pedialyte may come into play. But I would say water, and then I've seen some different recipes online of people making their own sports drinks using water and honey and Himalayan pink salt, which has a ton of minerals in there, and lemon juice and things like that. So I would say that's a healthier alternative.
I think Cole misspelled meditation, but I think he was asking for meditation.
Yeah, I'm huge on meditation. I actually meditate myself. I'm huge on it. It only needs to be a short period of time, but I think it's a way for guys, again, kind of like yoga, to learn to control their breath, to allow themselves. I really preach visualization a lot. I think when you visualize yourself having success, the likelihood of you achieving that success is much higher. So I definitely am a fan of meditation. Same thing as yoga. You can go on YouTube. There's plenty of guided meditations out there. And I'm definitely a big proponent of that.
I'm going to grab the one off Facebook, John, and then you can get Mike's last question, all right?
Yeah.
If no injuries are present, is 6 to 8 weeks per year with no throwing at all still seen as the best way to develop?
Yeah, I've actually changed my thoughts on this over the last, I don't know, maybe year or so, where I used to recommend kids to shut down 2 to 3 months completely from throwing. And I think what's really, really important now is for people to understand that the different stresses that are put on the arm depending on the throwing that you're doing. So I think taking 2 to 3 months off might actually, from throwing completely, might actually be too much, because you want to develop that feel for the ball in your hand. Maybe it's incorporating plyo drills to start to clean up arm action and address some of those things. But I think 6 to 8 weeks is sufficient of no throwing at all. And then I think, again, providing there's no injuries and overall you're healthy and you didn't have like an insanely high workload the year before, I think that would be a good time to then start picking up a ball and addressing some of your, I wouldn't call them weaknesses, but areas for improvement.
That was something big that we worked on this year, was building arm fitness with guys, because there's a big difference between pitching and throwing. So we definitely wanted to make sure we minimize the overuse from a pitching standpoint. But as long as guys are continuing to throw, like I think, John, we only took like 4 to 6 weeks off without actually picking up.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think most guys who maybe ended, I think we limited most guys to like October 1st is like their last weekend of pitching. And then we gave them like 4 weeks because they didn't really have a high workload all season. And then they go back on like their plyo care routine and building into like some of the stuff that we had discussed with them, and then they built up into throwing the baseball and blending it all together. So yeah, I think there were only maybe a few guys who took more than that off, and they just stopped playing after summer ball. So we gave them a little more time. But yeah, I'd say most guys it was like 4 to 6 weeks probably.
And then it was just a slow. That was the
Yeah.
key. We wanted a slow ramp up as
I was
opposed
just going to say that.
as opposed to just taking the time off and then feeling like you have to rush
Yeah,
to build up
absolutely.
into the program.
Absolutely. It gives you more time to on-ramp and prepare yourself to maybe even get into, like I think, like we were talking about earlier, certainly development can take place during the season, but at the same time, they need to go out and compete. So you really can't push the intensity levels as much in season. Like you can't get guys doing, pull downs all the time or, necessarily doing like a weighted ball throwing program. They can be incorporated into your practices, but I think the off season is a time where you can really get after it, providing you've prepared your arm and your body to do that.
Yep.
I'm actually gonna grab this question, John, because you and I were just talking about it. So I want to hear your and Chris's opinion about flat grounds, and what your opinions are, because I know there's starting to be a little bit more of a debate on the actual usage or productivity or benefit of a flat ground.
You want to go first, John? Or you want me to go?
Yeah, sure. That's fine. I'll go. It's funny that, Matt and I have, like he said, we literally have just been talking about this. And this is something now, like, I think it's so important that if we're training guys to move a certain way on the mound, why aren't we training them on the mound? Like if we want them to perform for us and move efficiently on the mound and we're training them in a flat ground environment, well, then you're providing a different stimulus, I guess you can say, to their body once they get on the mound. It's like it throws them off. Now there's a slope, like their landing is a little different than when the ground is flat. So my thing is, and this is something I picked up listening just a couple weeks ago to Scott Brown from Vanderbilt, was he talked about playing catch off the mound, and I think that's something that like is very simple. You can just have your guys like after practice, after they go through their long toss and their pull down phase or whatever, is if they're at that point in the season, like have them play catch on the mound instead of doing flat ground work or throwing short boxes for that matter. And I think that's something that we did a little flat ground work this year, but I really spent more time like on short box stuff. And I think it's more beneficial to really, and even plyo care mound work. Like, I think it's good if like in the early part of the off season, staying on flat ground and just like easing back into it. But once you get to like, I don't know, this ballpark it at late December, you start really mixing things in on the mound. So that way, like, especially in the off season, guys have everything they're doing is strictly on the mound besides their catch play and long toss. And then even incorporating on recovery days, doing like catch play on the mound. I think that's important. I've gotten away from flat ground work, and I think Driveline even came out with a study that the mound is less stressful than flat ground. So that's something that I think is going to slowly start to go out the window. I know for us this offseason, it's something I probably won't even have guys do that much of.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with everything that you just said. Yeah, I was going to reference that Driveline study. I think they showed that the stress that's put on your arm off of a mound is not that much higher than what it is on flat ground. So, from a perspective of specificity, it's definitely beneficial to get your work in on the mound as much as possible. And then it's just paying attention to intensity or RPE, rate of perceived exertion.
Mm-hmm.
So over the last several years, I've definitely changed my mindset on that, where if a guy's going to throw a flat ground, he might as well just throw a short box. And actually something interesting that I've done the last several years with short boxes is I've had guys do them with the Driveline command baseballs. And I think it just creates a little bit of, I don't do it with everybody, but I definitely think it creates a little bit of variation and challenge to get them outside of their comfort zone a little bit and just allow them to feel some different things. So I've done some competitions with that where I break them up into two teams inside in the gym, on two mounds next to each other. And have them compete for how many pitches they can execute in a certain time frame as a team. And the kids really like that. I mean, I think competition is something that needs to be worked into practice as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's all, like you said, it's all about monitoring that, like you said, the RPEs, like what their day consists of, and I think that's like great. You can throw a guy out on the mound, but as a coach, like it's our job to make sure like it coincides with what they can handle for that day, what they did the day before. So yeah, no, I couldn't agree more on that.
Yeah, it's tough. I would say monitoring the intensity is tough because, like, I'm constantly preaching that in order to throw hard, you have to throw hard. You have to practice throwing hard. You need to train your body to move explosively. And I always use the analogy of, if I told you that you needed to get faster, you're probably not going to go out and go for a jog. You're probably going to go out and run sprints in an effort to get faster. That your arm works the same way, your body works the same way. That if you want to throw harder, you have to practice throwing harder, but you also have to understand that that can't be a daily thing, you
Yeah.
know? And I think that's where monitoring the intensity becomes so important. And probably a radar gun, everybody thinks of a radar gun as, you're trying to see the highest number possible, but it's also a way to monitor intensity. If a guy's max fastball is 90 and, you only want him to throw at a lower intensity today, then tell him he's not allowed to throw a pitch over 80, and it's just constant feedback for them, and they start to figure out what their body can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
All right. I was actually – go ahead, Chris.
No, that's it.
Yeah, I was laughing because I saw the last comment about the NFL draft kicking off. I think they're just about to make the first pick. But I think that was really good. I think that it was very very beneficial, and that a lot of guys definitely learned a lot and can take out of this, especially parents and players.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate you having me on. You guys have done a great job with this whole series. So if I could just offer, any closing advice to anybody who's listening, any players that are out there, my biggest piece of advice is be your own best coach. There's some great coaches out there, and there's some, definitely some good advice around the state in some places, but be your own best coach. There's so much information on the internet now that you can get for free. Go on there, find it, educate yourself so that now you start to understand, what you're doing, what you need to be doing. It's going to create a whole lot more buy-in. And when you're bought into something, you're going to get so much more benefit from it. So that would just be my closing advice to any player.
Last thing really quick.
Yeah.
Mike Webb, 15 team versus 9 team in a 3-game series.
Well, the 2009 team is probably the best team in the history of the state, so I got to go with them. Now, but his 2015 team was really good. They were really good. I mean, to look at what those guys are doing now and the level of success that many of them have achieved is certainly impressive. And last year's team, 2019, I would probably put up there with some of the best ones that I've seen too.
Sure.
So,
all right. Thanks for coming on board.
it.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys later.